Captain Elias Hart steered his ship, the Nomad, through the swirling nebulas and asteroid fields that marked the boundaries of the Orion Nebula. As he approached the infamous Galactic Bazaar, a hive of activity where the universe's denizens came to trade, his eyes narrowed with purpose. Today, he was not just any trader, he was a man on a mission. Beside him, his first mate and old friend, Jonah, flicked switches with practiced ease, preparing their descent. "You think this artifact really exists, Elias?" Jonah asked, skepticism lacing his voice. "It's not just a myth," Elias replied, his gaze fixed on the sprawling market appearing on their viewport. "I've seen it, Jonah. Zorvax has it, and he's here." The market was a floating metropolis of ships and stalls, bustling with alien life forms from all corners of the galaxy. As they docked, Elias felt the familiar thrill of adventure tingling in his veins. He patted the blaster at his side and smirked. "Stay sharp. We're not here to shop." Stepping out into the chaos, Elias and Jonah were immediately engulfed in a cacophony of alien dialects and the rich smells of exotic spices. Stalls brimmed with gadgets and gizmos, precious metals, and mysterious artifacts from forgotten worlds. They made their way through the crowd, heading toward a secluded corner of the market known to cater to more discreet clientele. That's where Zorvax conducted his business. A towering figure, draped in dark robes, Zorvax was surrounded by bodyguards. As Elias approached, the Overlord's piercing eyes met his, a smirk playing on his lips. "Captain Hart, you've come a long way for a fairy tale," Zorvax's voice boomed, causing a few nearby traders to glance nervously in their direction. Elias stood firm, Jonah flanking him. "I'm here for the time spinner," he stated boldly. "I hear you're interested in a trade." Zorvax laughed, a sound that echoed ominously through the air. "Indeed, but the price is steep, human." He gestured to a cage behind him, where a female alien with luminous blue skin and eyes like liquid silver sat quietly. Her name was Mira, and her beauty was stark against the grim shadows of her confinement. Elias's heart tightened at the sight, but he masked his discomfort with a veneer of indifference. "What's so special about her?" he asked casually. "She's the last of the Seraphine, a race known for their telepathic abilities. Rare. Valuable." Zorvax eyed Elias. "A fair trade, I believe, for what you seek." Jonah caught Elias's eye, a silent conversation passing between them. Elias knew the moral weight of the decision he was about to make, but the stakes were higher than his own conscience. He nodded slowly. "Release her to me, and the time spinner is yours." Zorvax clapped his hands, and the guards unlocked Myra's cage. As she stepped out, her gaze met Elias's, an unspoken understanding flickering between them. "Do not think this makes you my savior," she said softly, her voice a melodic contrast to the harshness around them. "I'm no one's savior," Elias replied, feeling the weight of her eyes on him. "I'm just a man trying to stop a greater evil." With Mira at their side, Elias and Jonah navigated back through the market. Each step away from Zorvax and toward their ship solidified Elias's resolve. He had made a questionable choice, one he would have to face eventually. But for now, they had to prepare. With the time spinner nearly within reach and a new ally by his side, the real journey was just beginning. Chapter 2. The Reluctant Deal. The interior of the Nomad hummed with energy as Captain Elias Hart, Jonah, and their new companion, Mira, made their way to the command center. The ship's walls, lined with digital maps and various space navigational tools, flickered softly in the dim light. Mira looked around curiously, her serene demeanor belying the intensity of their situation. Elias cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "We'll set a course for the Calypso sector. It's remote enough to buy us some time to figure out our next move," he said, punching coordinates into the console. Jonah leaned against the navigation table, eyeing Mira warily. "And what exactly is our next move?" "We've got the Overlord's prize now, her." He nodded towards Mira. "But no closer to the artifact. What's to stop him from turning on us the moment we hand it over?" Myra's gaze shifted between the two men. "He won't," she said quietly. The time spinner is cursed. Zorvax fears its power. He needs someone expendable to wield it. Elias met her eyes, a spark of intrigue in his own. And you know how to use it? With a slight nod, Mira responded. I've seen it done. My people. We understand things beyond the physical. I can control it, but there are risks. Jonah scoffed. Great. An ancient cursed artifact with risks. Just what we needed. Despite his words, there was a begrudging respect in his tone. The conversation was cut short by a sudden jolt that shook the ship. Elias swiftly moved to the control panel, his fingers flying over the sensors. We've got company. Looks like Zorvax isn't waiting around. Jonah rushed to the weapons console, his demeanor instantly shifting to that of a seasoned fighter. Battle stations, he barked, a hint of excitement in his voice despite the danger. Let's see if the old girl's got some fight in her. Mira moved closer to Elias, her presence calm and focused. Let me help, she offered. I can sense them, their movements. Working together, they maneuvered the nomad through a series of evasive actions. Myra's guidance was uncanny, her ability to anticipate the enemy's tactics invaluable. As they dodged another barrage of energy blasts, Elias glanced at Mira, impressed. How do you do that? He asked, genuinely curious. It's the connection, Mira explained, her eyes never leaving the viewport. Everything is connected through energy, through intentions. I can feel them. Jonah, meanwhile, managed to get a few shots off, hitting one of the pursuing ships. Got one, he exclaimed, a grin breaking across his face. But the victory was short-lived as more ships appeared on their tail. Elias frowned, realizing they were outmatched. We can't outgun them, but maybe we can outrun them. He turned to Mira. Any more tricks up your sleeve? Mira nodded towards a nearby nebula. Hide us there. I can do more with the cover. With a risky gambit in mind, Elias piloted the ship towards the nebula. The cloud of gas and dust enveloped them, cloaking the nomad from their pursuers. Inside the nebula, the ship's lights and systems dimmed, running silent as they drifted through the cosmic fog. Jonah watched the sensors, his usual bravado replaced with a tense silence. Elias stood by, ready to make their next move. Mira closed her eyes, extending her senses to feel out their enemies, guiding Elias with soft instructions. After what felt like an eternity, she finally opened her eyes, a faint smile touching her lips. We're clear. They've moved on. Elias let out a long breath, the tension draining from his shoulders. Thanks to you, he said, looking at Mira with newfound respect. Jonah clapped Elias on the back, a wide grin returning to his face. Well, Captain, looks like we've got ourselves a secret weapon. He glanced at Mira, including her in his moment of camaraderie. Welcome to the crew, Mira. Together, they steered the ship out of the nebula, their path forward uncertain but their resolve strengthened by the bonds forming among them. As they set their course to the next destination, each knew that the challenges ahead were formidable, but so was the trio that faced them. Chapter 3: Escape Velocity. The interior of the Overlord Zorvax's ship was as imposing as its master. Dark, labyrinthine corridors stretched into dimly lit chambers, and everything from the floor to the ceiling seemed to pulse with a low hum, as if the vessel itself were alive. Mira, with her iridescent blue skin catching the faint light, walked just ahead of Elias and Jonah, who were trying their best to keep the tension from boiling over. Zorvax will never let us leave, Mira said quietly, her voice steady despite their predicament. Elias kept his tone light, even as his grip on the blaster at his hip tightened. We don't need his permission. Jonah, got a read on those guards. Jonah, clutching a handheld scanner, frowned. Two at the next junction. Armed and nasty looking. Looks like Zorvax upgraded his goons since the last time we met. Mira glanced back at them, her silver eyes glinting. I can distract them. Telepathy can be persuasive. Persuasive, huh? Jonah raised an eyebrow. As long as it doesn't get us killed. Elias nodded. We'll follow your lead, Mira. Just give us the signal. Mira closed her eyes briefly, her fingers brushing the wall as if she were listening to something beyond their range. Then she opened them again and motioned for them to follow. As they approached the junction, the distant voices of two alien guards echoed through the corridor. Mira stepped forward, her gaze steady, and before Elias could react, she turned the corner alone. Jonah grabbed Elias's arm. "You sure about this? Just sending her in." "She can handle herself," Elias replied, his jaw set. "Stay ready." Around the corner, Myra's soft, melodic voice drifted back to them. "I'm lost," she said, the hint of a tremble in her tone. "Please, I don't know where I'm supposed to go." One of the guards barked something unintelligible, but Mira stepped closer. "I'm sorry, I was just trying to find the artifact chamber. Zorvax said I could see it." Another sharp exchange followed, and then a low hum, faint but present, seemed to resonate through the air. Jonah frowned at Elias. "What's she doing?" "Wait," Elias said, his eyes narrowing. A moment later, the humming stopped, and a heavy thud echoed through the corridor. Then another. Mira reappeared around the corner, motioning them forward. "They're sleeping," she said simply. Jonah blinked. "Sleeping? What do you mean sleeping?" "Just keep moving," Elias said, not wanting to waste any more time. "Good work, Mira." As they hurried down the now clear corridor, Jonah muttered under his breath. "Sleeping guards. This job gets weirder every second." Mira smiled faintly. "I didn't say they'd stay that way forever." "Fair enough," Jonah replied, adjusting the grip on his scanner. The trio reached the maintenance wing of the ship, where a maze of pipes and conduits stretched out before them. Elias stopped, surveying the area. "The hangar should be this way," he said, pointing to a shaft ladder descending into the lower levels. "Once we get to our ship, we make for the nearest uncharted sector." Mira hesitated. "There's something you should know. Zorvax, he placed a tracking device on me. He knew I would try to escape eventually." Jonah groaned. "Perfect. And when were you planning to share that little detail?" "I didn't think it mattered until now," Mira said evenly. "If we get out of his range, the tracker will deactivate. But we have to move quickly." Elias weighed the risk and nodded. "All right, Jonah, you go first. Mira, you're with me." As they climbed down the ladder and navigated the maintenance ducts, the sound of distant footsteps grew louder. Zorvax's guards were waking up. Elias quickened his pace, Mira close behind. When they finally reached the hangar bay, the sight of the Nomad waiting for them brought a fleeting sense of relief. Jonah rushed ahead, punching in the access code to open the ship's hatch. "Elias, I'll get the engines hot. You bring her in." Elias nodded. He turned to Mira, who was scanning the hangar with an almost clinical detachment. "Ready." "More than ready," she replied, following him into the ship. Once inside, Jonah's voice crackled over the comm. "We've got incoming. Guards just entered the hangar. Better strap in." Elias and Mira strapped into their seats in the cockpit. Elias's hands moved swiftly across the controls, and the ship roared to life. The hangar doors were still sealed, but the shields that kept the atmosphere intact flickered as Jonah fired up the Nomad's weapon systems. "Hangar doors are locked," Jonah called out. "Looks like they're trying to keep us grounded." Mira leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she stared at the control panel. "I can handle that." Elias watched as she placed her hand on the console, her eyes closing in concentration. The lights flickered, and a low hum filled the cockpit. A moment later, the hangar doors groaned and began to open. Jonah whistled through the comm. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." Elias gunned the engines, the ship surging forward. The guards fired wildly, energy blasts streaking past the hull as the Nomad shot out into open space. The sudden transition from the hangar's dim light to the vast darkness of space was jarring, but Elias didn't have time to think about it. He had to put distance between them and Zorvax's ship. Jonah's voice came over the comm again. "Looks like we're clear. For now." Elias let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He turned to Mira, who was leaning back in her seat, her expression calm. What was that back there? With the doors? Mira gave him a small, enigmatic smile. I have a few tricks left, Captain. Elias nodded, impressed despite himself. Good. We're going to need them. Chapter 4. Amongst the Stars. The cabin of the Nomad hummed with the steady rhythm of its engines, sending a gentle vibration through the walls. Elias Hart sat at the cockpit's helm, staring out into the black void of space as stars blurred past them. Mira sat in the co-pilot's chair, leaning back with her eyes half closed, while Jonah sprawled across the bench near the navigation console, hands behind his head. The air in the cabin was calm, but the weight of their situation hung unspoken. Elias broke the silence. We'll hit the next refueling station in a few hours. Jonah, make sure we've got enough credits left for a full load. Jonah snorted. With what? A handshake and a smile? We're running low, Captain. Not a lot of people want to trade with a ship that's been flagged by Zorvax's forces. Mira opened her eyes and looked at Jonah. I might be able to help. Jonah raised an eyebrow. What? You've got a stash of credits we don't know about? Not credits, she said simply, then glanced out the viewport. I can sense people's intentions, remember? Negotiating might go more smoothly if we know who's willing to deal. Elias leaned forward, his arms resting on the console. You're saying you can tell who's honest and who's trying to scam us? Mira gave a small nod. It's not that simple, but I can sense their emotions. Nervousness, hostility, trust. It's not perfect, but it could give us an edge. Jonah looked skeptical. So you'll tell us who to trust, and we'll just hope it works out? Sounds risky. Everything we're doing is risky, Elias said firmly. If Mira says she can help, I trust her. Jonah shook his head but didn't argue further. All right, but don't expect me to start shaking hands until we've got something solid. Myra's lips curled into a faint smile. You'll see. It works. For the next several hours, the three of them talked, planning their approach for when they reached the refueling station. Mira shared what she knew about reading emotions and intentions, while Jonah explained the finer points of trading and bartering in the far reaches of space. The discussion was lively, even if Jonah's skepticism remained. Despite their different perspectives, the camaraderie in the cabin grew stronger. Eventually, Mira stood and stretched. I think I'll rest for a bit before we arrive. Let me know when we're getting close. As she walked past him, Elias caught a faint smile on her face. He found himself smiling back, though he quickly turned away, focusing on the navigation display. Once Mira was out of earshot, Jonah leaned in toward Elias. All right, Captain, spill it. Spill what? Elias asked without looking up. You and Mira, Jonah said, smirking. I see the way you look at her. Elias sighed. It's not like that. Could have fooled me, Jonah said. Not that I blame you. She's sharp. She's got those telepathic powers. And let's not forget she saved our butts more than once. But you sure it's a good idea to mix business with whatever this is? It's nothing, Elias said, more firmly this time. We're focused on the mission, nothing more. Jonah leaned back, crossing his arms. All right, if you say so. But don't be surprised if this nothing turns into something before you know it. Elias didn't respond, his mind swirling with thoughts he didn't want to entertain. Instead, he stared out into the star-filled void, letting the silence take over once more. Hours later, when the refueling station came into view, Mira returned to the cockpit. She studied the large, spinning station on the display screen. How should we approach? Elias glanced at her. You tell me. What do you sense? Mira focused for a moment, then nodded. There are traders here who will deal with us, but some are hiding something. A few are genuinely open to trading, though. Jonah raised an eyebrow. Hiding what? I can't tell exactly, Mira said. It could be something as simple as trying to make a quick profit, or it could be something worse. But the ones at Docking Bay 4 feel genuine. Elias gave her a nod. All right, we'll try Docking Bay 4. As they approached, Elias guided the ship to a smooth landing. Once docked, the three of them stepped onto the station's metal floors. The interior was bustling, with traders of all species moving from stall to stall, exchanging goods and credits. Myra's gaze darted from one face to another as they made their way to the bay she had indicated. "See anything?" Elias asked quietly. Mira nodded toward a group of merchants near the center of the bay. They're honest, at least compared to the others. Jonah grunted. "I'll be the judge of that." Elias motioned for the group to follow him, and they approached the merchants. A short, round alien with mottled skin greeted them with a friendly chirp. "Welcome, travelers. What can I do for you?" "We're looking to refuel," Elias said. "And we need it at a fair price." The merchant's eyes darted between Elias, Jonah, and Mira. "A fair price, eh? That depends on what you have to trade." Jonah stepped forward. "We've got a few surplus parts, some high-quality circuits, and a few crates of long-lasting rations." As they spoke, Mira remained quiet, her eyes fixed on the merchant. Elias noticed her focus and gave her a questioning look. After a brief exchange of goods and a little back-and-forth haggling, the merchant smiled widely. "A pleasure doing business with you." Elias extended a hand, and the merchant shook it. "Likewise, we'll be back if we need more." As they walked away, Jonah glanced at Mira. "So, was he honest?" Mira nodded. "He wasn't hiding anything serious. A little greed, but nothing harmful. I think we made a good choice." Jonah smirked. "All right, I'll give you that. Maybe these senses of yours aren't so bad after all." They returned to the Nomad, their tanks full and their spirits a bit lighter. As the engines roared back to life and they left the station behind, Elias glanced at Mira again. This time, she caught his gaze and held it for a moment before looking away, a small smile playing on her lips. "Good call, Mira," Elias said quietly, earning a grateful nod from her. Chapter 5: The Power of the Artifact. Elias leaned on the control console, staring at the floating asteroid base through the viewport. Its surface shimmered faintly under the distant glow of a blue star. The structure, built into the side of the asteroid, was a maze of crumbled ruins and jagged outcroppings. A long-forgotten civilization had once thrived here, but now it was silent, abandoned. "Think it's safe?" Jonah asked, standing beside him with arms crossed. His voice carried a hint of unease, though he tried to hide it behind a steady tone. "Safe enough," Elias replied, not taking his eyes off the base. "Nobody's been here in centuries. If we're going to figure out what this artifact is, this is the place." Mira entered the cockpit, her movements quiet but deliberate. Her presence alone brought a certain gravity to the room. "I can feel it already," she said softly. "This place has a resonance. The artifact will respond here." Jonah glanced at her. "Resonance? You sure it's not just the creepy vibe of a dead rock?" Elias straightened and glanced back at Jonah. "Keep it down. Mira knows what she's talking about. Besides, we don't have much of a choice. If we don't learn what this thing can do, Zorvax will come after us again." "Fine," Jonah said, throwing his hands up, "but I'm keeping the weapons systems on standby, just in case." The trio descended to the asteroid's surface. The air was thin and cold, the gravity light. Elias carried the artifact in a protective case, while Jonah hauled equipment in a large pack. Mira led the way, her steps guided by something invisible. She didn't need directions. She seemed to know exactly where to go. Inside the ruins, the atmosphere was heavy and thick with ancient dust. Fragments of alien carvings adorned the walls, depicting strange, flowing patterns and symbols that none of them could decipher. They reached a central chamber with a wide, circular platform in the center. Faint blue light flickered along its edges as if it were waiting for them. "Set it down here," Mira said, pointing to the platform. Elias hesitated. "Are you sure this is the right place?" "I'm certain," she replied. Her voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of urgency. "The artifact will respond. I can help you unlock its potential, but we need to start now." Elias exchanged a look with Jonah, who gave a reluctant shrug. With a steady hand, Elias placed the artifact on the platform. Its smooth surface gleamed faintly, catching the chamber's flickering light. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, The artifact began to pulse, its glow synchronizing with the platform's patterns. Mira stepped forward, her hands outstretched, her silver eyes reflecting the artifact's light. I need to connect with it. It won't be easy, but I can do it. Elias looked worried. What do you mean, connect? How dangerous is this? Myra's gaze didn't waver. It won't hurt me, but I need your trust. Please. Jonah crossed his arms, clearly skeptical. Sounds like the kind of thing that gets us all killed. Elias ignored Jonah's comment. Go ahead, Mira. We'll keep watch. She closed her eyes, and her hands hovered just above the artifact. The glow intensified, and a low hum filled the chamber. Patterns of light danced along the walls, revealing more of the carvings. Myra's expression remained serene, but her breathing grew heavier, as if she were drawing on some unseen force. Jonah stepped closer to Elias and whispered, This doesn't feel right. What if she's making things worse? Let her finish, Elias said firmly. She's the only one who understands it. Suddenly, the light surged. Mira let out a sharp breath and stumbled backward. Elias caught her before she could fall, helping her steady herself. I saw something, she said, her voice trembling slightly. The artifact can bend time, not just speed it up or slow it down, something more profound. It shows glimpses of what could be, of what was, but it's unstable, dangerous. Elias looked at the artifact, its glow now steady, its humming a soft background noise. What do we do with it, then? Destroy it? Mira shook her head. No, we need to understand it first. Destroying it now could release the energy trapped inside. We have to learn how to control it. Jonah scoffed. Great, so we're babysitting a cosmic time bomb. How reassuring. Elias gave Jonah a sharp look. We're protecting the galaxy from it. You'd rather let Zorvax get his hands on this. Jonah fell silent, muttering something under his breath. Mira took a deep breath, recovering her composure. It's not just Zorvax. Others will come for it once they sense what it can do. We need to stay one step ahead. Elias nodded. Then we use this base to study it. We set up here for a while, figure out what it can do and how to handle it. Jonah, get the equipment ready. Mira, tell me everything you saw. As the three began their work, the artifact continued to glow faintly, its secrets waiting to be uncovered. The silence of the ancient base was broken only by their quiet voices and the occasional hum of the artifact. Chapter 6. The Pursuit. Elias' heart tightened his grip on the controls as the Nomad shuddered under the strain of sudden evasive maneuvers. A proximity alarm blared throughout the ship's cabin, bathing the interior in flashing red light. 2 ships closing fast, Jonah shouted from the navigation console. His fingers raced over the display. They're coming in at Vector 629. They'll be on us in under a minute. Shields up, Elias ordered, flipping switches overhead. Get the engines to maximum burn, Jonah. We need to put some distance between us and them. Mira appeared in the cockpit doorway, her expression calm despite the chaos. It's Zorvax's men, she said. I can feel them. They won't stop until they have me back. Or worse, the artifact. Jonah glanced at her, skepticism barely concealed. You can feel them? That's just great. What else do you feel? The lottery numbers. Cut it out, Jonah, Elias snapped. She's helped us more than once. Mira ignored the jab and stepped further into the cockpit. They're not just pursuing blindly. I think one of them is a tracker, a telepath like me. They'll anticipate every move we make unless we break their concentration. Any ideas how we do that? Elias asked, sparing her a brief glance as he steered the ship into a sudden barrel roll. Mira hesitated, her gaze distant. If I focus hard enough, I might be able to disrupt their mental link. But I'll need time, and you'll need to keep them off us until I can finish. That's a tall order, Jonah muttered. 2 ships against 1? Even if we pull a miracle out of nowhere, they've got more firepower, more speed, and now you're saying they've got psychic powers. It's not about firepower, Elias said, a determined edge to his voice. It's about staying one step ahead. He turned his focus back to Mira. Do what you need to do. Jonah and I will keep them busy. Jonah groaned but didn't argue. Instead, he leaned into his console, activating the Nomad's limited defensive systems. A pair of turreted laser cannons sprang to life on the ship's hull. We've only got so much juice in these things, he warned. Then make it count, Elias said. Mira closed her eyes and took a deep breath. I'll be in the communications bay, she said. There's less interference there. Give me as much time as you can. Without another word, she turned and left the cockpit. As soon as she was gone, Jonah let out a low whistle. That woman's got guts. I'll give her that. She's got more than that, Elias replied, banking hard to starboard. Let's make sure she gets the chance to prove it. The Nomad raced through a dense asteroid belt. Elias expertly navigated around jagged rocks while Jonah used the ship's meager firepower to keep the pursuing ships at bay. Every few moments, a burst of laser fire lit up the cockpit as Jonah's cannons targeted one of the enemy ships, scoring a hit here and there. They're persistent, Jonah said through gritted teeth. I don't think I've ever seen pilots this relentless. They're not just pilots, Elias said. They're Zorvax's enforcers. They have everything to lose if they let us get away. In the communications bay, Mira sat cross-legged on the floor, her hands resting lightly on the metal panels beneath her. Her eyes were closed, and her breathing was slow and deliberate. In her mind's eye, she could sense the thoughts of the tracker on board one of the pursuing ships. It was like a shadow looming in the distance, tethered to her own mind by a faint, pulsing thread. She reached out mentally, probing the connection, looking for a way to disrupt it. Felt slippery, hard to grasp. The tracker's mind was trained, disciplined. They wouldn't be easily shaken, but she had to try. Back in the cockpit, Jonah cursed as one of the enemy ships landed a glancing hit on the Nomad's aft shields. We can't keep this up much longer, Elias. We just need a few more minutes, Elias replied, voice steady. Keep firing. Keep them focused on us. Elias banked the ship sharply, dodging another asteroid and forcing the pursuing ships to adjust their course. Jonah managed to land another hit, this time sending sparks flying off one of the enemy vessel's wings. But it wasn't enough to take them out of the fight. In the communications bay, Mira pressed deeper into the tracker's mind. She could feel their focus, the threads of their mental presence wrapping around her. She pushed back, sending waves of dissonance into the connection. First, nothing happened. But then she felt a shift, a tremor in the tracker's concentration. The shadow in her mind wavered, becoming less distinct. Mira pushed harder, sending a mental burst of confusion and fear. The shadow recoiled, and she felt the tether snap. Her eyes flew open, and she let out a shaky breath. Back in the cockpit, Jonah blinked at his console. One of them just veered off. What just happened? Elias didn't answer. He was too busy guiding the Nomad through a tight gap between two massive asteroids. When Mira stepped into the cockpit moments later, she looked tired but resolute. I broke their link, she said simply. Jonah's jaw dropped. You what? They can't track us now, Mira explained. They'll have to rely on sensors alone. Elias glanced at her, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. That's more than we could have asked for. Good work, Mira. With one ship off their tail and the other struggling to keep up, Elias pushed the Nomad to its limits. They emerged from the asteroid belt and streaked into open space, leaving the pursuers far behind. The cockpit was silent for a moment, save for the steady hum of the engines. Jonah leaned back in his seat, exhaling loudly. I can't believe we made it. Elias turned to Mira. You were right. We wouldn't have made it without you. Mira offered a small smile. We're not safe yet, but this will buy us some time. Elias nodded. Time is all we need. We'll figure out our next step. Together. Chapter 7. Sacrifices and Choices. The Nomad drifted into orbit around a hidden planet, shrouded by thick, swirling clouds. The planet's surface glimmered faintly, dotted with glowing green patches that seemed alive. Elias and Jonah stood in the cockpit, scanning the unfamiliar world through the viewport. Mira sat behind them, her expression unreadable. "This place doesn't show up on any of our charts," Jonah said, adjusting the controls. "And believe me, I've got charts that go back centuries." "That's the point," Mira said quietly. "No one knows it exists anymore. My people called it sanctuary. It's where they would come to meditate and unlock their powers. The last Seraphine who understood the artifact's full potential left clues here." Elias looked over his shoulder at her. "What are we hoping to find?" Mira stood, walking toward the viewport. "A way to neutralize the artifact's energy safely, without destroying it outright. If we can stabilize it, we keep it out of Zorvax's hands without unleashing its full power." Jonah scoffed. "Great. A mystery planet and an ancient puzzle. This just keeps getting better." Elias ignored Jonah's sarcasm and focused on Mira. "And you think we'll find those answers here?" "Yes," she said firmly. "But you have to trust me." Elias nodded. "We didn't come all this way to turn back now." Jonah prepped the landing gear. "Mira, lead the way once we're on the surface." Jonah shook his head, muttering something about how they always ended up in the weirdest places. As the ship descended, the glowing patches grew brighter, casting an eerie green light over the landscape. When they touched down, the trio stepped out into the humid, otherworldly air. The ground beneath their boots was soft and spongy, almost like moss. The glowing green patches turned out to be clusters of bioluminescent plants, their light pulsing gently. Strange trees with twisting branches reached toward the sky, their bark shimmering faintly. "This place gives me the creeps," Jonah muttered, scanning their surroundings. "It's too alive." "It's beautiful," Mira said softly, walking ahead. "This way." They followed her through a forest of luminous trees, their path illuminated by the soft glow of the plants. The air was thick and damp, and every sound seemed amplified. The crunch of moss underfoot, the distant rustle of leaves. Mira moved with purpose, her step steady. Elias quickened his pace, walking beside her. "How do you know where to go?" "I don't," Mira admitted. "Not exactly. I can feel it. The artifact's energy resonates with this place, and I'm following that resonance." Jonah, trailing behind, muttered to himself, "Great. Following a feeling. That's a surefire way to—" He tripped over a root and stumbled, catching himself just in time. "I'm fine. Everything's fine." Mira turned slightly, suppressing a smile. "You're doing great, Jonah." "Thanks," Jonah said sarcastically, brushing moss off his jacket. "Glad someone appreciates it." After what felt like an hour of trekking through the glowing forest, they emerged into a clearing. In the center stood a stone structure, ancient, weathered, and covered in faintly glowing symbols. The structure was circular, with a flat surface on top that seemed to hum faintly. "This is it," Mira said, stepping toward it. "The last Seraphine used this place to focus their powers and stabilize the artifact's energy. If I can connect to it, I might be able to neutralize the artifact." Elias reached out, touching her arm lightly. "What does that mean for you?" She hesitated, then met his gaze. "If I do this, I'll lose my connection to the Seraphine hive mind. I'll be cut off, alone." Jonah, standing a few paces back, frowned. "You're saying you'd give up your entire connection to your people? Just to fix this thing?" Mira nodded slowly. "It's the only way." Elias's brow furrowed. "There has to be another option. You shouldn't have to sacrifice that." "There isn't another option," Mira said, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. "If I don't do this, the artifact will remain unstable, could fall into the wrong hands again. This is the only way to ensure that doesn't happen." Jonah threw up his hands. "This is insane. There's no guarantee it'll even work. And if it doesn't, then what? You'll have cut yourself off for nothing." Elias glanced at Jonah, then back at Mira. "We have to trust her. She's gotten us this far." Jonah muttered something under his breath but didn't argue further. He stepped back, crossing his arms as Mira moved closer to the stone structure. Mira took a deep breath, placing her hands on the flat surface. The glowing symbols on the stone flared to life, spreading outward in intricate patterns. A low hum filled the clearing, growing louder as Mira closed her eyes and focused. Elias and Jonah watched in silence, the glow intensifying until the entire clearing was bathed in green light. Myra's expression shifted, first to concentration, then to something deeper, almost serene. Her connection to the hive mind was slipping away, but she held firm. The hum reached a crescendo, and then, with a final pulse of light, the artifact, still secured in Elias's pack, fell silent. The glow faded, and the forest returned to its soft, pulsing light. Mira opened her eyes and stepped back, her hands trembling. "It's done," she said quietly. "The artifact is stable now. No one can use it to harm anyone." Elias stepped forward, steadying her. "You're sure?" Mira nodded. "It worked." Jonah exhaled loudly. "Well, I'll be damned." Myra's gaze lingered on Elias. "Thank you for believing in me." Elias met her eyes, a faint smile touching his lips. "You gave us a choice when we didn't have one. I couldn't let you do this alone." The three of them stood in silence for a moment, the weight of Myra's sacrifice settling over them. The artifact was no longer a danger, but the cost had been high. They had survived together, but the journey wasn't over yet. Chapter 8. The Culmination. The Nomad hovered over a desolate planet, its jagged surface lit only by the distant light of a dying star. Elias stared out of the cockpit window, his expression grim. The swirling atmosphere below shimmered with faint electric charges, giving the barren landscape a surreal glow. Jonah leaned back in his seat, arms crossed. "This place doesn't scream safe hiding spot." "It's the only place," Mira said quietly from behind them. She stepped forward, her silver eyes reflecting the eerie light. "The artifact's power resonates with this planet. This is where we can end this." Elias glanced over his shoulder. "You're sure?" Mira nodded. "I feel it. This planet is where the Seraphine first learned to harness that energy. It's like it's been calling me here." Jonah exhaled sharply. "I don't like this. Feels like we're walking straight into Zorvax's hands. He's been tracking us the whole time." "We don't have a choice," Elias said, his voice calm but firm. "If we don't deal with this now, he'll keep hunting us. And the artifact's too dangerous to leave as it is." Jonah muttered something under his breath but didn't argue further. Mira remained silent, her focus inward as though listening to something no one else could hear. Elias adjusted the controls and brought the ship into the planet's atmosphere. The Nomad shuddered as it descended through turbulent winds and glowing clouds. When they landed, the ground was cracked and barren, a vast expanse of dark stone that stretched to the horizon. Electric discharges sparked in the distance, faint streaks of light that danced along the rocky terrain. Mira stepped out first, her boots crunching on the uneven surface. Jonah followed, scanning their surroundings. "Still not feeling great about this," he muttered. Elias brought up the rear, the artifact secure in its protective case. He felt the weight of it, not just physical but the weight of responsibility. He didn't fully understand its power, but he knew it was nothing to take lightly. Mira led them across the barren expanse toward a distant formation of towering spires. The spires glowed faintly, the same eerie green light they'd seen on the hidden planet. Jonah stayed close to Elias, casting nervous glances at the flickering horizon. "I don't like those sparks," Jonah said. "Looks like the planet's about to light up." "It's been like this for centuries," Mira said without looking back. "The energy here is what made it possible for the Seraphine to master the artifact. It's why Zorvax will come here." "Exactly my point," Jonah grumbled. "He'll be right on our heels." Elias ignored the bickering. His focus was on the spires ahead. They seemed to pulse in time with the faint hum coming from the artifact. It was as if the artifact was alive, responding to the planet's energy. When they reached the spires, Mira stopped. She turned to face Elias and Jonah. "We need to set the artifact here," she said, gesturing to a platform at the center of the formation. "The energy from the planet will neutralize it permanently. It'll still exist, but it won't be dangerous anymore. No one will be able to use it." Elias placed the case on the platform and opened it. The artifact inside pulsed faintly, its glow almost hypnotic. Mira stepped forward and placed her hands near it, not touching, but close enough that the energy seemed to flow toward her. The spires glowed brighter, and the hum grew louder. Jonah took a step back. What now? Mira closed her eyes, concentrating. Now we let it connect to the planet's energy. It will take a moment. As they waited, the ground trembled slightly. The glow from the spires intensified, and the artifact's pulsing became more erratic. Myra's breathing grew heavier, her focus entirely on the artifact. Suddenly, a shadow appeared on the horizon. A sleek, dark ship broke through the clouds, heading straight for them. Jonah cursed under his breath. Guess who's here? Elias grabbed his blaster. Mira, how much longer? I don't know, she said, her voice strained. I'm almost there. Just hold them off. The enemy ship landed, and Zorvax emerged, flanked by his enforcers. His towering figure was draped in dark armor, and his eyes burned with determination. You can't hide from me forever, Captain Hart, Zorvax called out. His voice was smooth, confident, and deeply unsettling. Elias stepped forward, his blaster raised. You're too late, Zorvax. The artifact is already being neutralized. Zorvax chuckled, a low, menacing sound. Do you think I came all this way without a backup plan? Jonah fired the first shot, hitting one of Zorvax's guards. The ensuing chaos was a blur of blaster fire and shouting. Elias kept himself between Zorvax and Mira, firing whenever one of the enforcers got too close. Jonah's sarcastic commentary cut through the noise, his shots hitting their marks with impressive accuracy. Elias, I hope this plan of yours works, Jonah shouted over the din. It's not mine, Elias replied, taking down another guard. It's hers. Zorvax moved closer, his armor deflecting several shots. You can't protect her forever, he taunted. The artifact will be mine, no matter what. Elias held his ground, but Zorvax's forces were relentless. Myra's voice suddenly rang out. It's done. The spires blazed with light, a pulse of energy radiating outward. Zorvax and his enforcers froze, momentarily blinded. Elias seized the opportunity, grabbing Mira and pulling her behind the platform. Jonah fired one last shot, forcing Zorvax to retreat. As the energy faded, the artifact's glow dimmed. It no longer pulsed or hummed. It was quiet. Elias looked at Mira. Is it over? She nodded, her face pale but steady. It's neutralized. Zorvax can't use it now. Zorvax growled, glaring at them. You think you've won? This isn't the end. It's the end for you, Elias said, his voice firm. Now get off this planet. Zorvax hesitated, then gestured for his remaining forces to retreat. His ship rose into the sky, disappearing into the clouds. Elias let out a long breath and turned to Mira. You did it. Mira gave a faint smile. We all did. Jonah approached, still holding his blaster. Next time, can we not let a galactic overlord follow us? I'm not sure my heart can take it. Elias chuckled, clapping Jonah on the back. I'll see what I can do. The three of them stood in the shadow of the spires, the artifact now silent and dormant. Their journey had brought them here, and while the danger wasn't completely gone, they had made a choice. A choice to stand together against something far bigger than themselves.